to get the wages they can earn here in the city, and maybe also so they don't have to pay the rent, so close by. And isn't that great? But at the same time, because we haven't built enough housing, we're fundamentally pricing out the people who can't keep up, don't have those same jobs, and even the people who are earning really great salaries are feeling the pain of the housing crisis, right?
It's true.
I actually don't know. I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a single friend who has been able to own a home unless they won the birth lottery. I don't have a single friend who's been able to purchase a home unless they got help from their family, right? And that's kind of crazy. And I've got a lot of the people here who grow up here are in a pretty similar situation, at least if they're in sort of my age group, right? Because housing used to be a little bit cheaper and a little bit more accessible to middle class people. So what are the consequences of our housing shortage? It comes from near the top all the way down. People are feeling this pain. And it's a driver of high rents and displacement and gentrification, of segregation, of homelessness, of poor housing quality, which we also need to focus on, right? And of tenant harassment. So that's the landlord's market. And how you shape, that's fundamentally the structural reason why we are seeing ever escalating rents. And so the theory of City of Yes for housing opportunity is we need to address that structural imbalance by creating more housing and creating a renter's market, where landlords will compete for tenants, where they will lower prices, because they have to. Because landlords, absent a regulatory scheme, right, are just gonna get as much money as they can. Okay, and that's their business. Okay, next slide. So we are aiming to try to address that housing shortage by, like I said, adding a little bit more housing to every neighborhood, because Manhattan isn't the same as Staten Island. It's not the same as Eastern Queens. South Brooklyn's not the same as Williamsburg. Everybody gets that. And people have preferences around the kind of communities they live in. And so it's a proposal that tries to meet every community where it's at and adapts to different kinds of contexts. So what I'm going to outline is a couple of proposals that work differently depending where you are in the city, okay? Next slide. Now, in terms of homelessness, I just wanted to really focus in on, for this group, for obvious reasons, we are trying to address the homelessness crisis through this proposal through two ways. One is to reduce housing prices overall, because we know that housing prices are fundamentally the driver of the homelessness problem, right? Homelessness is a housing problem. The second is through specific initiatives in the City of Yes that are designed to directly, not indirectly, but directly increase the amount of supportive housing and deeply affordable housing that's being delivered across the city. And those, a few that I'll highlight, are the universal affordability preference, commercial conversion, shared housing in smaller units, and new rules for supportive housing. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, well, here's our big map of where what we're calling medium and high density neighborhoods and low density neighborhoods. So anybody who's familiar with New York City, this is not a surprise. You're seeing, this is where you see a little bit more high density development in those areas in yellow, and in the lower density parts of the city are in blue. And so City of Yes has different ways of addressing these different parts of the city. Next slide. So one of the first things we're going to do is make it legal to build modest apartment buildings again in New York City. Now, before 1961, this was the dominant form of housing development in New York City. And then, in 1961, a very not fair housing act, a very Robert Moses rezoning of the city dramatically changed the way the city worked and made it illegal to build the kind of housing on the left, which you see really all over the city and all over low density neighborhoods. It's just all older, right? And so we want to make it legal to build those kind of small buildings again, because they're a huge driver of affordability. We also have, all across the city, these districts that theoretically are supposed to allow like 2-family homes, but over years we've set up so many rules that it's actually impossible to even have a 2-family home. And so we're trying to simplify that so that the zoning districts we have are what they say they are, rather than a kind of very convoluted conspiracy to make sure we have new housing. Okay, next slide. Another big proposal is to allow accessory dwelling units. This is a way to allow homeowners of a 1 or 2-family home to add a modest apartment. Maybe it's a backyard cottage, maybe it's a basement apartment, which we know we have many, many illegal basement apartments across the city. Maybe it's a garage or attic conversion. Now, this is something that's done all over the country and rather successfully. In California now, if you believe it, 1 out of every 5 new homes is an ADU. And it's a huge benefit to multi-generational families and seniors and sort of middle-class people who are trying to afford home ownership, right? A mortgage payment, it can provide a little extra income. It can be a place where the in-laws stay when they're in town. So this part of the proposal, it's a little controversial, right? You might hear ADUs are a 4-letter word in some parts of the city. But we think people aren't understanding that this isn't anything someone's forced to do. It's totally an option, and it helps fit family needs really well, which is one reason why AARP has endorsed the city of Yes and the ADU. Okay, next. So when we talked about legalizing modest apartment buildings before, what did I mean, right? Well, here's one example. Across the city, you're probably familiar with this. It's like the archetypal New York street, right? Just a few stories above ground floor retail. It's kind of like what you think about when you think about New York City proper. And on the left here, this 1-story commercial, that's what you see all over the city, because starting in 1961, we made it effectively illegal to do the right. And so you probably noticed this if you're going around the city, if you live in a lower density neighborhood, there's all these 1-story commercial stretches, right? It's just like a bank, big place, nothing on top. Why is that? It's because we made it impossible to do the thing on the right. And so on commercial corridors, that is existing commercial blocks all across the city, we want to make it legal to do the right. 2 to 4 stories above housing, above a commercial ground floor. Next slide. And these are the commercial overlays. That's the existing commercial areas in the city where we're proposing to make this possible. You can see that it syncs up pretty well with some of the lower density parts of the city. Next slide. Then the other big sort of modest apartment building proposal is transit-oriented development. So you see these areas in blue. Those are areas that are close by rail stops, including the Staten Island Railroad, and also some LIRR stops, right? Metro North stops. And here, if you're on a wide street, I think it's 75 feet or wider, or the short end of a block, you think about avenues and a street, right? On that corner there. Then, so you have to be half a mile from transit, half a mile from train, on a wide street or a short corner of the block, and then on a large lot, we'll let you build, again, a modest multifamily apartment. That's the proposal. Okay, next slide. This is a big move, and now we've moved from the lower density parts of the city to the medium and high density parts of the city. This is called the Universal Affordability Preference, or UAP. And here's the concept. If what you add is affordable housing, and only affordable housing, we'll give you a little bump. Okay, you can be 20% bigger if that 20% is affordable. And now you're
What's
going to
affordable though?
what is affordable?
Exactly. Right. Same thing I
The
said.
answer is, it's at an average of 60 AMI, average, which means you can have some 40s, some 100s, you can blend, but you have to be able to get to 60 AMI. And that's good, because what it does is, one, it works, right? It actually can pencil. It's important that we have affordability requirements that will be used, that can work. And the second is that it goes deeper than what's required under state tax incentives. And so through city law, we're gonna be achieving greater affordability than we would have gotten in the absence of a change in zoning. And so we did a back of the envelope calculation. This isn't perfect, because it's like a kind of hypothetical, but if this had been in place since 2014, we'd have 20,000 more affordable homes in the city, enough to house 50,000 New Yorkers, which is like, I don't know, Binghamton, right? That's a big deal. And also importantly, although this works with mixed income housing, you can have some market rate units and some affordable. It also works if you're trying to build 100% affordable housing. And so it will work where you're trying to do supportive housing or deeply affordable housing, well, deeper than 60 AMI. So this is one of the parts of the proposal that's really designed to deliver deeper affordability in parts of Manhattan and Brooklyn that have really not been contributing affordable units for a long time. Next slide. Okay, this one's also controversial. We're proposing to eliminate parking mandates across the city, full stop. Now, what does that mean? That means that you can still build parking if you want it. Go ahead, build as much parking as you want. But the city isn't gonna force you to build parking you don't wanna build. Now, why? Why? Because as we've gone around the city and examined what's happening, we find that parking is in direct conflict with creating housing, even in parts of the city that are really transit connected, okay? In 1961, when Robert Moses and that era was happening, they really wanted to enshrine a car-centric view of this city. And so these guys, I don't know how they did it, but they just wrote a very complicated formula for the amount of parking that every single part of the city has to have, okay? And we were living with those rules today. And what it means is that people stop building housing where the parking mandate starts to apply. So we have examples, a lot of them, where someone could have built 16 units and they stop around 10. Because if they were to add those 6 other units, room for 6 families, then they would have had to add parking, and it would have actually made the entire development impossible. And so if you're talking to people who build affordable housing or builders, they know just how consequential parking mandates are. And so again, this is a bold move. This is a move directly in favor of trying to address the housing shortage head on. And so I don't want to sugarcoat this big change. Now, at the same time, other cities across the country have done this. And here's what happens. In places that are not super transit connected, people put parking in because people want parking. And in parts that are where there's not the demand for parking, people leave it on the table. They don't do it. They build housing. And just to dramatize for you the cost of parking right now, when we mandate that people build parking, even when it's not wanted, the average cost is $60,000 a parking spot in New York City right now. I know that one blew my mind for certain. I was like, how? Right? And that's partly because you have to bury some parking, right? I mean, it's expensive. And the space of just two spaces, when you think about the turning radius of turning out of a parking spot, is a studio apartment, the average studio apartment. So that's the direct trade-off that we're trying to address. Next slide. Okay, here's another one. The world changed. We have maybe fewer people going to the office, you may have heard. right? We have a lot of commercial buildings that are a little bit too vacant. And so we're proposing to dramatically expand the ability of commercial buildings, office buildings, to turn into housing. And this seems to be like an apple pie. Everybody's in favor of this, which is great. And what's really nice is when it pairs with a new state tax incentive to do affordable in office conversions, we're gonna be delivering affordable housing in parts of the city that have failed to add any affordable housing for a really long time. Parts of Manhattan that have great access to jobs, great schools, where, you know, they should be open to working families again. Next slide. We're also eliminating barriers that prevent campuses across the city from adding housing when they want. And one aspect of this proposal is what the mayor likes to call yes in God's backyard, which is, because you've heard, you know, no in my backyard, yes in my backyard, yes in God's backyard. Okay, so
I've never heard of that.
you have churches all over the city, right, who are great partners to build affordable housing. They see the need in the congregation. They hear directly from people about their struggles to stay in a community.
They don't want that.
They also, frankly, see it in the missing faces in the pews, right? Because communities have just changed so violently as a result of not having enough housing. And they want to be part of the solution, but we have rules that make it really difficult to add new housing, even if they have space, like maybe a half-empty parking lot that they like to use for housing. And so we're changing rules to allow these low-density campuses to add some housing, if they want, Next slide. We also, and this might be particularly interesting to this group, are trying to greatly liberalize the rules around new shared housing, which is, you know, housing with shared bathrooms, kitchens, other common amenities. And this used to be a really common housing model in New York City. I don't have to tell this group. It used to be like you read any novel about somebody or a biography of some person coming to New York in the early part of the 20th century. And it's like, I didn't have $5 in my pocket, so I went to the lodging house, and I stayed in the lodging house, and I built up, and now I own a home. And it's like, what happened to that? Well, what happens when we made it illegal to have that kind of housing? And we want to make it legal again. And we want to do it in such a way where we're not replicating some of the problems of the past. This was a way too unregulated space. And so HPDs are working on a really exciting set of rules to make sure these are high quality, regulated new forms of shared housing that can be really good for people just arriving in the city or seniors that are looking to downsize, struggling with housing costs. And it can be that first rung on the housing ladder. And we also want to make it easier to build studios and other modest apartments near transit. What we have right now are rules that really prevent you from having buildings of those smaller unit sizes. And there's so much demand for that, right? In the city, so many young people are in the city trying to find a space, would prefer to live in their own space and instead maybe have roommates they don't even know. I certainly was in that position. And you're all sharing like a family size apartment. And then actually that takes away the family size apartments for everybody who needs a family size apartment, right? I think about it as like, that's not a family, that's 3 kids in a trench coat. But that's directly a consequence of our rules, so we're trying to liberalize those rules too. Next slide. We also want to make it easier to build supportive housing around the city. We want to make it so that if you're building supportive housing, you can be, this is a little technical, but for this group I hope it's welcome, that you can be classified either as residential or community facility, just and those are zoning terms, depending on what just makes the most sense for your project. And that'll introduce a lot of good flexibility for those of you who are doing development. Also, we want to make it easier to get the permission to build high-density supportive housing by moving from something that always requires the full ULURP to something that might be a certification or an authorization, which again are just shorter timelines of public review for things we don't want to come up so much. Next slide. Okay, so I dumped a lot on you. This is a big proposal, but to summarize, we're trying to change a lot of things that haven't changed in 60 years because we haven't been building enough housing, especially in some communities where, as my friend from HPD was saying earlier, have really not added any housing at all in generations. And the goal is that if we add a little bit of housing everywhere, that adds up to a lot of the housing we need. And all in, if we were to do this, it would add 100,000 new homes over the next 15 years. Which is it's kind of amazing you can do that with just these kind of like small changes that fit things that were legal 60 years ago, right? But it is true that you can get that much if you do modest things across the city all at once, which would be enough to house 250,000